This is Kento. He possesses the most formidable personality in the game, and the most viewed on Mijijirvars. Renowned by the moniker Monarch, all are captivated by him, dedicating countless hours observing his lethal actions. The ultimate adversary, and dispelling the most dreaded fortress on the network. Yet on the day he was ultimately departing, to disclose his visage to his admirers, his sibling Raito Jinguji severed the flow, assault him, declared he had acquired the account, and assumed King's position in front of the entire assembly. Suddenly, Kento squandered the renown he established from the ground up, and was still obligated to observe his sibling. On television, existing, lauded, similarly to, he was the mastermind behind it all. Following an extended period of feeling despondent, he resolves to stage a return, and declares he will do whatever is necessary to eliminate his sibling. No profile and no funds. He secured a substantial loan amounting to 25,000 and purchased a new virtual reality chamber. Kento commenced his participation in the game, designed a fresh avatar, referred to as Shadow, and established two objectives. He required to generate revenue swiftly, and he sought to exact retribution on Raito. Within the Tower Instructional Guide, the existing record pertains to his former persona, Monarch. Even with a completely fresh persona and statistics entirely at nil, Kento retained all the expertise and proficiency from the preceding instructional guide. The countdown commenced, and he ascends, sweeping through spaces as if it's insignificant. With each level he traversed, he shattered a milestone. On the 6th level, the elevations were already considerable, yet not for him, who vanquished the goblin by hurling a blade accurately into its gullet. The unfortunate canine attempted to seek retribution, but the MC executed it flawlessly without faltering perspiration. He was already making his way to the 7th level, and merely 2 minutes had elapsed. Shadow was relentless, ascending to the 7th, 9thly, 10th level, and confronting the ultimate adversary. This unattractive creature is at level 12, a substantial disparity in contrast to him, who is at level 1. Nonetheless, the main character did not retreat, proceeded directly towards it, relying on his own expertise. The creature became disoriented. At that instant, he perceived the opportunity, thrust the blade directly into the center of the beast's brow, and completed the introductory dungeon. Upon accessing the rankings, he spotted his name at the top, shattering the instructional world record. However, the genuine test commences now, due to the activation of a concealed objective. Gazing upward, he observes the silhouette of a soaring beast, and he becomes frightened because he's utilizing a completely fresh account now. Conquering this beast is going to be quite difficult, as it has reached level 50. The protagonist gazes icily, seizes the blade, and charges directly at the beast. The dragon soars through the skies, unleashing flames from above. He observes a heap of stones, advances aggressively, executes an enormous leap, and begins carving the dragon incessantly. The countdown had merely 60 seconds remaining. Thus, the individual explores every conceivable method to wound the dragon. Yet nothing appears to be effective. As he descended onto the dragon's neck, he discovered a rock and discovered the vulnerable aspect. At that moment, he elevated the blade and thrust it into the rock, cleaving, divided it into 2 equal parts. The dragon begins to disintegrate and was utterly vanquished. Within 14 minutes and 59 seconds, he established a new benchmark on the covert operation. His prize was an enchanting chest, and upon his opening it, he obtained a mythical blade, referred to as Chorus, which possesses utterly shattered statistics. In addition to being an uncommon blade, it also possesses awareness and is capable of conversing, implying this is the most overpowered weapon in the game. Before long, he reaches the village of origins. When he claims he was taken aback by the king's presence, the blade swiftly silences him. Upon reflection, he asserts that even if the product's attributes are minimal, it's still iconic, signifying it holds significant value. Koro advises the child to cease pondering over that, and claims it to be the finest blade on the planet. We are led into the woodland of origins. Shadow is prepared to advance and pursue elite-tier items, as he requires funds. Eventually, we observe him dispatching a goblin, as the blade urges him to cease severing such feeble little beings. Observing that he has attained level 4, the protagonist chooses to invest in dexterity, Yet, upon his opening of the panel, he discovers that the sword's attributes have increased as well. Elucidating this, Koro states that its capability allows it to evolve in tandem with its proprietor. Inquisitive, the child inquires about what that additional statistic is, yet the blade claims it remains unaware. Abruptly, Shadow perceives sounds and swiftly deduces. There are an additional 7 individuals in close proximity. We observe a collective of athletes expressing gratitude to Sudi, who grins and states her role is assisting newcomers. The protagonist observes that although he can detect 7 entities, he's currently involved with just 4 individuals, which indicates that 3 of them are concealed in the darkness. The malevolent blade suggests that this is quite typical when individuals seek to pursue novice players. As he cannot tolerate scoundrels who exploit the vulnerable, the youth resolves to intervene. The blade indicates it anticipated he was the Avenger type, demonstrating that it has not ceased interpreting his thoughts for even an instant. Upon encountering him, Sudi inquires whether he is also a newcomer. Upon his affirmation, the other participants become thrilled. However, Shadow asserts that this isn't the ideal location for novices to gain experience. He then deflects the hunter's strike, leading the man to comprehend that the youngster requires no assistance whatsoever. Observing the duel, the other participants inquire about their course of action, calling out in confusion. The boy advises them to flee the area. However, additional hunters emerge from the foliage. The gang chief strikes once more, leading the protagonist to understand that this is far from finished. A young lad resolves to disregard it all and rushes forward. However, prior to the protagonist taking any action, the child suffers a lethal blow. Shadow is left astonished, and a notification emerges stating that the boy will be unable to participate for 24 hours. The pursuers advance towards the girls, assuring them not to be concerned, as they will soon be accompanying him. Mocking them, the supervisor asserts that he will maintain a serene and composed atmosphere as he concentrates on protection. Gazing at the cache, one of the killers remarks that it's solely due to the king. Subsequently, he expresses regret for allowing that to escape. Abruptly, Sodi perceives a shift in the hooded individual, radiating extreme stress. The child instructs the gentleman to repeat that statement and clarify the connection between King and this matter. The hunter claims he has no understanding of the subject matter, and before he is able to respond, his head is severed. With his eyes shimmering, the protagonist asserts that he has been hearing that name frequently. Thus, he seeks the reality. Kuro inquires about the situation and wonders why the youth is not paying attention. Recognizing that he has entirely succumbed to his fury, it endeavors to soothe the situation, as it has experienced that previously. A notification emerges indicating that a dual verification process for account deletion has been enabled, and the designated player will be removed from the game. Observing the protagonist's abilities, the mercenary chief contemplates the bizarre situation unfolding. The player who had perished reappears and begins, fleeing from the shadowy talons. Yet he is apprehended, and as he pleads for assistance, he's drawn into a chasm, emerging into a frigid perspiration. Soti remains oblivious to everything, pondering what that hand signifies, and why her companion's remains are the sole ones that failed to vanish. Shadow instructs the child to cease feeling frightened. The pursuit has merely commenced. Contemplating internally, the mercenary determines this is not the Yijijiju, or stanza he recognizes. Confronting the player directly, the protagonist inquires about the reasoning behind it and seeks to know who issued the command to eliminate novices. Shouting, the killer claims he is adhering to the king's directives, and it is not his responsibility. Engulfed by animosity, the child begins delivering fierce blows. Subsequently, he inquires about the reasons behind their actions, and Sodi, weeping, expresses her uncertainty. Administering the concluding cut, the protagonist declares that under those circumstances, he might as well perish. Upon removal, the dual field for account deletion is disabled. Observing that the child appears somewhat lightheaded, one of the young women inquires about his well-being before expressing her gratitude for rescuing them. Our associate claims it was not a significant matter. However, the individual donned in the hat contests this, asserting that during his battle, he resembled the king himself. Shabi chooses to withdraw and take a seat. Anxious, Kuro inquires if he is okay, but the child remains silent inquiring about what that area was earlier. Sensing the strain, the blade advises its wielder to temper his murderous aura, as its memory information is safeguarded, and its sole awareness is that the dual arena is where participants' accounts are placed as wagers. Thus, those enormous hands are referred to as the hands of the divine. They are accountable for absorbing players' account details, preventing them from being reborn since that information is essentially akin to a spirit. Upon reflection, our associate asserts that it's astonishing for a talent to wield such immense influence. He then comes to the understanding that he has inadvertently replicated Rito's actions. The blade indicates that the child's feelings triggered a malfunction in the safeguarding mechanism, and that its originator contributed to the development of the game but was dismissed. And the final sensation it experienced prior to being reconfigured was intense suffering. Rising to his feet, the protagonist declares that it's favorable, as he vowed to take vengeance on the king and asserts his belief in that narrative. He chooses to inspect the belongings he collected. Kuro remarks that the man's left hand is trembling, and that he plans to feign ignorance of it. Equipped with the falcon wristband, the black wolf elixir, and the venom fang blade, Shadow mentions that the adversaries possessed some valuable treasures, and he plans to sell the remainder at auction. When an individual inquires whether he is genuinely that impoverished, he responds that regardless, he can accomplish his objective solely by vanquishing rare creatures. Subsequently, we are led to the Forgotten Path. Subsequent to strolling for a period, Kuro inquires whether his master has become disoriented. Refuting the claim, the main character asserts that once they exit the camouflaged labyrinth, they will arrive at the NPC's stronghold. They resemble humans significantly and can prove advantageous for acquiring intelligence regarding rare monsters. The blade inquires whether he lacks any human companions. Our protagonist replies that he has consistently engaged in solitary play. He swiftly shifts the topic upon detecting the scent of smoke. Reflecting on his sibling, he remarks that in addition to experiencing helplessness, he was aware that something significant was being obliterated, and now he must determine how that occurred. Strolling through the scorched hamlet, he shouts inquiringly to see if anyone is present, until he perceives a young girl named Rin weeping for assistance. Shadow successfully retrieves the NPC from the debris prior to the most unfortunate occurs. Subsequently, he seizes a restorative elixir to assist her, yet when she unveils her gaze, she shouts and retreats. The main character asserts that he is present to assist. Weeping, the young girl inquires whether he plans to contact the monarch. We discovered that a band of unknown individuals arrived in the village and abducted all the grown-ups. Under the king's directive, when inquired about his well-being, Shadow affirms that he is fine and reassures Kuro not to be concerned. He then declares that it is time to eliminate those accountable for that catastrophe. In the distance, they observe a contingent of men assaulting a local inhabitant. The man attempts to shield himself with his hands. Abruptly, the main character emerges behind one of them and with a solitary blow extinguishes another existence. The infernal blade remarks that the dagger appears challenging to wield, and when he inquires if it harbors jealousy, it refutes the notion, claiming it merely disapproves of that particular weapon. Subsequently, eliminating nearly the entire group, Kunto asserts that he required rehearsal to employ it effectively when the situation was truly significant. Out of nowhere, an individual begins to shriek. The commander of the mercenaries claims the individual yells, excessively burdensome for a non-playable character that is merely intended to provide information. In tears, the man declares he solely desires the chief, prompting the assassin to resolve to conclude this swiftly. However, before he can act, one of his companions has his head severed entirely. Upon incapacitating the captain, the main character remarks that he is considerably sluggish, and as he approaches, he inquires if the individual on the ground is all right. The man expresses his gratitude for the assistance, and upon learning about Rin, he expresses his desire for Shadow to assist his community in progressing. Given that their commander was apprehended as well, our associate consents, and we are subsequently led to the location where the captives are confined. Anxious, Kuro urges his master to maintain composure to prevent the activation of that field capability once more. As he dashes into combat, he claims he is aware that the antagonists don't even receive an opportunity to respond. Merely 4 remain in a state of alarm, and one of them inquires about the identity of the individual. Abruptly, an additional mercenary appears, grasping Rin's father as a captive, and instructs him to remain still. The townsfolk panic when they observe their chief in that manner. Encircled, the main character can sense his blade pleading with him to maintain his composure. Yet nonetheless, he claims he intends to eliminate them all. One of the thieves asserts that this is their territory, and that, should the individual relinquish the sword, he is free to depart. Instructing the gentleman to remain silent, our lad engages the account exclusion parameter, sending all the hired fighters into a frenzy. The individual, with his visage concealed, successfully deflects the initial blow and inquires what his associate is delaying for to conclude the captive. Trembling uncontrollably, he understands he is unable to shift due to the toxin from the hero's blade. With a brooding expression, the main character declares that it is time for the pursuit. Witnessing his companion succumb, the immobilized mercenary implores the child not to approach any nearer, if he desires the village chief to remain living. Demonstrating his swiftness, Shabi asserts that distance means little to him, and subsequently delivers a decisive strike. Having completed the task, he even witnesses the divine's influence in action. Eventually, we observe the main character inquiring whether Dalneo is all right. The gentleman affirms it, then inquires how he is aware of his name, and when he receives no response, he suggests that they should venture outdoors. When the duo arrives, a woman dashes over and embraces her spouse. As Rin embraces our lad, transferring the killer's emblem, the chief states it is to demonstrate the appreciation of all. Abruptly, Yuba appears and inquires about what sort of pathetic gratitude that is. Gazing at the child, the elderly gentleman expresses his gratitude on behalf of everyone, and expresses that if there's anything further they can assist with, simply let them know. The protaka expresses gratitude towards him, prompting the elderly man to recall his former status as ruler, cutting directly to the chase. The elder inquires if the young man is seeking knowledge, then presents him with a document containing the whereabouts of a certain location. Shadow's mouth gapes in astonishment as the elder instructs him to prepare for the journey. They clasp hands, and the protaka states he's departing, yet expresses gratitude for their warm welcome. Yuba claims that everyone will escort him to the departure, despite their aversion to witnessing his departure. Rin presents the young man with blossoms in appreciation for rescuing them. That prompts our lad to reminisce about his time as a warrior. Observing his departure, Dalneo expresses gratitude for his generosity. However, Kintio chooses to inquire about the reason behind the village's initial assault. The individual asserts that based on what he has gathered, the hired soldiers sought knowledge that only Elder possessed. Contemplating the situation, the protaka ponders what Rito is scheming. Abruptly, Kuro shouts to alert them to the peril. Pivoting, our lad confronts an adversary poised to attack. Employing every ounce of his nimbleness, he evades a barrage of strikes. However, when he falters, he comprehends that he could be in serious trouble. In the nick of time, he succeeds in seizing the infernal blade and deflecting the attack. He remarks that it is unfortunate the woman's ambush was unsuccessful. Retracing her steps, the girl with yellow eyes inquires about his identity and the events that transpired there, as the protaka ponders whether she is among the king's supporters. Preparing to take another turn, she remarks that few individuals are even aware of that hamlet. Thus, she insists on understanding the reason for his presence. They collide blades and come to the conclusion that their power is quite well balanced. Concerned, our lad remarks that she operates on an entirely different plane compared to the other subordinates. He strikes her in retaliation and inquires about her motivations for this behavior, if she possesses such expertise. Quaking, the adversary inquires how he has the audacity to treat her companions in such a manner, then attacks once more immediately afterward. Exerting all her energy into it, she claims she became engulfed in her fury, and that slaughtering individuals was an error. Shouting, Kato claims he acted solely due to their influence. Dalneo expresses a desire to take action, yet finds it unfeasible. Koru inquires whether the child genuinely believes he can triumph. Grinning, he affirms positively, and hurls his adversary with tremendous force against the wall. On the floor, the girl inquires whether his velocity abruptly increased, then states she cannot bear the thought of losing. As she rises, Shadow declares that it has come to an end for her. Upon observing the cursed blade, the woman inquires about the reason the protagonist possesses it. Astonished, our son inquires how she is aware of Koru. Abruptly, Rin seizes each of their arms and commands them to halt. Panicked, they inform the young woman that it is perilous, and that is when both of them come to understand They are not who they believe themselves to be. Ari states that if the individual is aware it was a misinterpretation, he ought to sheathe the blade. Grinning, he suggests that she ought to begin expressing remorse, yet neither of them appears inclined to concede. Upon hearing the young girl pleading with them to cease their altercation, the protagonist remarks that the woman owes her gratitude to the child. When inquired, the blade responds that it does not recall that moniker, yet it could, should its recollections resurface. Following the remark directed at Koru, labeling him a fool, the protagonist inquires how the girl is aware of the object, but when he receives no response, he states that he intends to leave since he is pressed for time. Rin approaches and informs him that he can return whenever he wishes. The primary individual states he will return shortly, then pivots and departs. Within her mind, Ari believes she will never express remorse, as the youngster assimilated numerous participants, yet she seeks to determine whether he is truly suitable to be her companion. Subsequent to strolling for a period, Xiaobai arrives at an arid expanse and begins examining the cartographic guide he acquired. It indicates the locations of the creatures that yield valuable treasures. Recollecting his obligations, he states that there is much at stake, encompassing his means of subsistence and his existence. Koru inquires whether the object in the sky is an insect, but the protagonist replies that it is a camera. He is set to record his inaugural appearance as a streamer. From the grains, a colossal creature emerges, with teeth that appear as if they are crafted from gold. Everything is ready. Kento mentions it's time to discuss further regarding the gemstone turtle. As soon as he understands that the objective is to collect resources rather than eliminate the creature, the blade suggests that genuinely seems enjoyable. Individuals begin to enter the broadcast, prompting him to grin, as truthfully, despite all circumstances, he genuinely enjoys that game. In addition to the turtle, a desert worm emerges from the earth. Focused, our lad scores his initial success. It propels a spray of sand, and the worm is immediately finished off. A member of the 6 spectators inquires, "What is happening?" And as the others remark on how outrageous that assault was, Shadow inquires whether Koru is capable of assimilating the creature. However, he claims that the exclusion zone is solely designated for player versus player interactions. Expressing gratitude for the contributions, he informs the audience that he is fully committing from this point forward. In reality, a child claims he was anticipating the commencement of another broadcast. However, he intends to remain for this situation. Following are the avian species of the arid regions, and our guy evades them as if he possesses foresight. The infernal blade inquires whether this isn't excessively simple for him. He simply states that this is the point where everything truly begins. He races, leaps into the sky, and when inquired whether he intends to commence accumulating supplies, he responds in the negative. For the further you delve, the more scarce the drops become. Koru states that under those circumstances, he is stepping away for a while. Reversing direction, the primary individual mentions that he indeed has one final minor task to complete. A spiny creature launches its projectiles without reluctance, compelling him to wield the blade for defense. The blade screams that it aches intensely, and that it isn't a barrier. Shadow mentions that cacti possess a sensing mechanism, so he intends to evade and shield against the assaults, and he will require Koru's assistance to ascend to the summit. Following a series of shouts, the individual ultimately reaches the summit of the turtle's carapace. Insulted, the illustrious blade inquires how he presumes to handle a mythical artifact in such a manner. Unexpectedly, an additional being appears. It is a level 40 griffin, with the breeze generated by its wings swirling about. The protagonist's eyes widen. As the foe strikes with its talons, Kento indicates that the disparity in levels between them exceeds twofold. Yet he sways, as he is aware that he will not be at a disadvantage in terms of attack velocity. Koru inquires whether it has concluded already. However, the child replies, "Not at this moment." Nevertheless, suspended in the atmosphere, the griffin gathers energy for a fireball and propels it directly towards him. He evades, believing the griffin will be compelled to descend once it exhausts its fireballs, and that will be the instant it is completely unveiled. All unfolds precisely as he intended, and Xiaobai begins searching for the tension location that directs to the adversary's vulnerable area. Once he discovers it, he casts his blade close to the bird's wing, and due to the toxin, the wing becomes immobilized. Seizing the opportunity, the protagonist delivers the final strike, causing the creature to vanish. Contributions and commendations flow in. Currently, and now 500 spectators are observing the broadcast. Concluding his remarks, Kento expresses gratitude to everyone for their attendance and mentions that he will host another stream in the near future. He additionally claims he is offering the goods for sale. Therefore, it is advisable for everyone to examine the Uncommon Merchandise Market platform. Observing the figures decline at an alarming rate, he contemplates what transpired. Subsequently, he discovers that King has just commenced a live broadcast, which infuriates him. Observing what's happening, Koru advises him to remain composed and inquires about his plans for the collection of items. Recalling that he has additional commitments, the primary individual expresses gratitude to the Blade. The Blade urges him to expedite his actions and proceed. Prior to inquiring about the identity of King, and the reason the child becomes so anxious whenever his name is mentioned. Reverting to reality, Shadow relinquishes all the funds he owed to the moneylender. The man inquires whether the funds are legitimate. Affirming that they are, our son inquires if he may leave now. The man replies affirmatively, noting that all expenses have been settled. Solitary in his chamber, he strides towards the pane and ponders whether the child bore a similar expression the initial time he visited. Upon returning home, the primary character preferences, the YGG Reversal Community Planning Hub page. We discovered that the items he amassed fetched a higher price than anticipated, which enabled the settlement of the obligations. Our lad chooses to jump into King's stream and observes that a multitude of spectators thoroughly enjoys watching him. The evening arrives, initiating yet another endeavor. He claims he is indifferent to those who despise him, and exited the broadcast, as his concentration is on providing his audience the finest amusement they could desire. Astonished, the protagonist urges King to cease, despite being aware of the futility. We perceive cries emanating from his earphones, and he asserts that if this persists, YGG Reverse is set to be obliterated. Keno leaps back into the match without hesitation, and Koru inquires about his hurried departure. We discover he is en route to Non-Glad due to annihilating a complete settlement. And claiming the lives of numerous individuals, the monarch declared that this would be his subsequent destination. Contemplating the situation, the protagonist ponders whether the traders were assaulted due to his actions, and concludes that he ought never to have broadcasted. As soon as he arrives in the metropolis, he can already hear cries emanating from inhabitants being assailed without any compassion. His eyes widen when he witnesses the extent of the devastation. One of the hired guns inquires about his identity, but when he remains silent, the man asserts that he will eliminate him as well, allowing him to unite with the king. Listening to that causes our son to be overwhelmed with fury once more, and with a solitary blow, he departs, leaving the ruffian with an arm diminished, then promptly invokes the hands of the divine. Upon the activation of the dual field, Shadow assaults the adversaries. Koru claims that the Assassin's Ring is exceptionally beneficial, as it provided a 20% enhancement to damage on stealth strikes, a novel ability referred to as Ice Unlocks, and the protagonist contemplates whether the statistic he employed siphons his adversary's powers. Seizing a man by the neck, he insists on discovering the whereabouts of the king. Ultimately, he is aware that King is currently broadcasting. When he receives no response, our lad concludes, another outlaw. Out of the blue, an individual wielding an axe captures his focus. Kentu inquires about his identity, grinning. The individual inquires what Kentu plans to do if he admits to being the mastermind behind all the murders. Without beating around the bush, the protagonist declares he will eliminate him. As he strikes, the adversary claims that's frightening. Yet nonetheless, Kentu, he should truly invest all his effort if he genuinely believes he can overcome him. Deflecting the strike, Kentu comprehends that the individual is more formidable than he anticipated. Observing Kentu retreating, the foe claims that it will conserve his time. Given that Kentu is so worthless, he isn't even deserving of a battle. When inquired about his well-being, our young lad assures Koru not to fret. The Axeman lunges once more, since he recognizes that it's not finished just yet. Evading, the protagonist concludes he must leverage velocity to his benefit. The hired soldier perceives the threats he faces. Astonished, Shadow inquires whether he employed rapid acceleration. Affirming it, the individual asserts that nonetheless, Shadow will still be unable to triumph over him. The cursed blade inquires once more if its wielder is well, then states that adversary reinforcements are immediately trailing them. Exhaling deeply, our young lad claims he is merely beginning. The adversary inquires whether he is the kind of person who loses his sanity due to a fear of mortality, which would be logical considering the rain is disrupting matters. Even the heavens aren't in his favor. Contradicting, the protagonist asserts that indeed they are, and subsequently employs his recently obtained ice ability. The assassin's feet become immobilized on the surface due to the icy grip. Experiencing disdain, the axe wielder declares he's weary of toying around. Emerging from behind the child, Shadow advises him to unwind and savor the moment a bit longer. Subsequently, he chooses to confront the remaining adversaries, who are swiftly engulfed by the dual field's capability. The group leader ponders how that could possibly be the case, and the reason the corpses are not vanishing. Unexpectedly, Koru begins to shout, transforming everything crimson. Exercising all his power, the protagonist endeavors to maintain grasp of the blade, which appears to be advancing to a higher stage. The lumberjack arrives and declares that he won't permit the youngster to act freely, yet he is pushed away before receiving a direct blow. Our protagonist claims that due to him, he has become even more powerful, then draws forth the blade and unleashes the grasp of the divine. The armament proclaims that it has concluded. Yet. Kento appears forlorn as he was unable to rescue anyone. Koru instructs him to glance behind. However, he asserts that all that remains is the metropolis and the remnants. Unexpectedly, an individual approaches and expresses gratitude for their rescue, disclosing they had been concealing themselves the entire duration. Before long, additional individuals arrive as well. The main character felt a sense of relief that he arrived promptly, but suddenly, from seemingly nowhere, another individual emerges and exclaims that it was astonishing. Listening to that tone, our lad's eyes widen. Positioned there, King declares that the moment has arrived to encounter the individual whom everyone has been discussing. Subsequently, the pair fixate on one another before the battle commences. Surprising the main character, the knight addresses him by his true name. Shadow begins to stammer, utterly bewildered. Koru inquires about the significance of that. Our lad claims it was that fellow who snatched the king from him. Weary of anticipation, Raito oscillates. He propels the child backward, and although he remains upright, he understands that the shockwave itself inflicted significant harm, and believes he cannot succeed due to the disparity in skill levels, which signifies he is on the verge of being vanquished by the persona he conceived. The infernal blade inquires whether he intends to refrain from battling. The main character begins to recollect all that Jinguji has deprived him of in reality, and ultimately concludes that within Yalgodribors, he cannot afford to retreat. Identifying himself as Shadow, he storms in and declares that he will no longer be Raito's plaything. The monarch engages his barrier to safeguard himself, and claims the child is merely a failure. Therefore, he ought to relinquish it at this point. Noticing his health points are diminished, our young lad engages his immediate speed enhancement ability, yet he is obstructed by the Imperial Sacred Array, which cancels out any and all harm. Kuro states that it's ineffective, and inquires if he has a strategy. He agrees because it is indeed accurate that his adversary's proficiency functions as long as he possesses sufficient MP. However, what the king is unaware of is that there exists a method to bypass that formidable sacred configuration. Executing the strategy, the main character believes he must persist in his assaults until he generates a breakthrough. Irritated, Jinguji instructs him to simply perish already, and at that moment, Xiaobai seizes an opportunity and attacks, surprising his sibling when he unexpectedly sustains harm. It appears that if King receives several blows to the precise same area, his ability is nullified, and executing that is essentially leveraging a flaw. You would only be aware of it if you truly understood the game. The knight remarks that despite that, he merely lost a single point. Indifference. Kintu asserts that it remains harm he inflicted, engaging in underhanded tactics. Raito claims he has something to reveal to him. On a large display, our young man observes the individuals he endeavored to safeguard with great effort, confined within an enclosure. A man inquires what actions led them to merit such a fate. However, the sentinel assaults him. Observing Shadow falter, The king inquires whether he comprehends the situation he currently occupies. He then discloses that he has individuals confined in several locations apart from Nonglade. Thus, if the child shifts even slightly, all the hamlets will be obliterated. Lifting his blade, the knight proclaims that the mightiest always prevails. Confronting him is futile, be it within the game or in reality. Sustaining his diminutive performance, Raito unleashes his sovereign blade dance ability. Blazes surge towards the main character as Kuro instructs him to evade, yet it appears that the hourglass has run out, and a timer commences. Plummeting from the precipice, Shadow contemplates whether he has been defeated and understands he must regenerate quickly to prevent his character from being erased. With 10 seconds remaining, the main character declares he cannot surrender, as he vowed to exact retribution. The issue is that he is unaware of any method to overcome Jinguji, which only increases the frustration. In the final moment, he begins to shout. However, all at once, the assassin's band begins to radiate, departing our lad entirely astonished. After a while, he arises within a chamber and contemplates the events that transpired. Resting against a piece of furniture, Kuro remarks that the child ought to be inquiring what an unfamiliar person is doing in the space. Abruptly, fingers encircle Shadow's throat, and a voice inquires whether he is alert. The main character swiftly retreats, unnerved, while the individual with the eye patch inquires if Yuba misidentified him. When questioned by the sword, our hero claims not to recognize that person, at least not in his present form. We discover that there are figures in the game referred to as the 5 illustrious NPCs: a swordsman, a monk, an archer, a mage, and an assassin. During his reign as king, Kento embarked on a quest alongside this man, Zaji, who is acclaimed as the most formidable assassin of all. The protagonist queries why he intervened on his behalf. Zaji replies it was due to the ring, which seemingly possesses an undisclosed purpose. With his arms folded, the young man declares that he requested Yuba to bestow the item upon a courageous individual, for the individual who obtained it would become his apprentice. Astonished, Shadow perceives this as his opportunity. However, Zaji asserts that the elderly woman must have been erroneous, as the child allows individuals to come far too near, far too quickly. Once he is recovered, he ought to simply depart, astonished and unwilling to be abandoned. The main character expresses that he is excessively frail and incapable of safeguarding anything independently. Therefore, he ought to have been contemplating ways to enhance his strength. Anticipating the direst outcome, Kuro advises his proprietor to relax. Out of the blue, the killer proclaims he has altered his decision and instructs the young man to rendezvous with him outside for an evaluation. Because if he can harness that sensation effectively, he could genuinely transform into someone significant. Rising to his feet, Shadow states that the objective now is to become an apprentice and enhance his skills, subsequently eliminate the authorities of Nordic Peak, and reclaim all that Raito appropriated. Outside, Zaji converses with an individual. That individual claims they only consented because Yuba requested. However, they also failed to identify the young man. It's Ari who, prior to departing, expresses a profound conviction that she and Shadow will reunite. As soon as the main character is prepared, he and the killer commence the trial. Contemplating inwardly, Kento claims he is unable to execute a combination. In the meantime, the individual sporting the eye patch inquires whether he isn't going to utilize his abilities. Thus, our lad engages Ice Barrier. He then employs rapid acceleration to launch an assault from the rear, but Zaji evades with a somersault and, leaping into a tree, exclaims. His velocity is respectable in comparison to the majority. When questioned, the main character discloses that he is at level 30, which leads the master to determine that he must attain a minimum of level 50. Upon successfully completing the examination, a quest becomes accessible. Pivoting, Shadow claims he will reach that tier within a week. However, the assassin claims he has merely 3 days if he wishes to become his apprentice. Understanding that he must achieve 20 levels within 72 hours, our protagonist concludes that rest will not be part of his immediate plans. In a different confrontation, Zaji remarks that his maneuvers are becoming foreseeable. Subsequently, he ambushes the young man from the rear. He strikes the earth and realizes he is unable to budge. The instructor inquires whether that is everything he possesses. Recalling his obligation to vanquish the king, The hero attempts to rise and break free, asserts he must vanquish the monarch. The individual instructs Kento to allow his murderous resolve to saturate his entire being, maintaining a calm demeanor, as that's the fundamental requirement to become his follower. Abruptly, a congratulations notification appears, and at last, the main character attains level 50. As he stretches, the assassin remarks that he anticipated it would require 5 days, which leads our young man to recognize that he had been behaving somewhat illogically. Upon acquiring the ability Shadow Path, Shadow is perplexed, but Zaji claims it's his characteristic, and he will demonstrate its operation just a single time. He vanishes into the darkness and reemerges behind the main character, stating that the ability enables the individual to step into the shadows of others. Koru expresses that it's intriguing and complements the assassin's ring exceptionally well. Advancing near, the mentor expresses that he has a request to make. He then discloses that he has encountered tales of previously unseen creatures, and concerning the disappearance of warriors and sorcerers. Given the perilous circumstances, possessing a companion would be beneficial. Our protagonist consents without delay, as successfully completing the task will yield rewards. We transition to a different location, where an individual expresses dissatisfaction, labeling a specimen as unsuccessful. Within 2 chambers, we observe 2 beings encased in tubes. Depressing a switch, the individual with blaze-hued eyes remarks that it's an admirable response. And following the assignment to conquer a level 50 opponent utilizing an enhanced creature, he states he must finish it for the purpose of his investigation. After a while, within the confines of his swamp, Kento comes to understand that Zaji was not joking regarding the creatures. The individual claims the objective is located within the estate, and that those beings remain unaltered. Observing a flurry of remarks emerging, he states he was unaware that Shibaze was a broadcaster. Our lad expresses regret for the boisterous assembly, yet the killer asserts it's acceptable, and the fact that receiving this level of attention truly energizes him. Rushing in, he triggers his ability, Threadline Blade Waltz, eliminating a multitude of creatures simultaneously. Contemplating, the main character acknowledges that the individual was indeed restraining himself during their confrontation. Zaji claims he will manage the remainder and entrusts the estate to Shadow. The central character proceeds directly to the cult's headquarters, and when the audience inquires about the situation, he replies that all he understands is the sect has been creating disturbances, and that the transmission could be interrupted in the no recording area. Kuro remarks that it's an odd phrasing, yet Kento maintains that he cannot allow anyone to view the combat arena. Subsequent to examining the chart, he reaches the 3rd level, and unveils the portals to discover what lies ahead. An adversary appears, yet it's so adorable. Our little one genuinely contemplates whether it is indeed a genuine adversary. Abruptly, an individual instructs him to gaze over his shoulder. He pivots and discovers himself, confronted by an entire swarm of beings. One of them swiftly advances, yet it vanishes in an instant. Reflecting on it, the main character concludes that they must be the encrypted beings. Suddenly, an individual materializes and remarks that he did not anticipate a commercially manufactured chimera to be defeated in a solitary strike. He remarks that it has been quite a while since he last encountered Shadow. The lad is perplexed, and the individual reminds him that he's Sooty, the novice tracker, and that he created a fresh account solely for the purpose of seeking retribution. Shouting, he calls forth another being, and following the emergence of a horned gorilla, he declares that it is his moment to enjoy himself. In an instant, objects are sent soaring, and the man is left gaping in astonishment. Perched atop the gorilla, the main character inquires once more about the identity of the individual he claimed he intended to eliminate. Emerging from behind the hired gun, he seizes the opportunity to inquire whether the individual is the architect of the sect. In a state of alarm, Sooty shouts for Kento to distance himself. Our lad indeed does then. Immediately resurfaces and inquires if he is attempting to have another account removed. Trembling uncontrollably, the man claims that the chief is situated beyond the massive doors and inquires if he is now secure, demonstrating that he is not. The main character eliminates him, declaring that he should never appear before him again. In reality, an onlooker remarks that Shadow is both frightening and impressive simultaneously. The main character strides into the laboratory as if he possesses it. Kuro claims the location is astonishing and contemplates who might be altering the creatures. Swiftly, our lad arrives at the final door, yet it remains secure. Thus he employs his blade to cleave through the timber and create a theatrical arrival. A bit further along, the researcher remarks that it was quite tumultuous, identifies himself as Irides, an official from Nordic Peak, and inquires if the youth arrived to disrupt his scientific haven. This indicates that he is the murderer they were cautioned about. With an unsettling gaze, the investigator claims that Shadow arrived at an opportune moment since he had just completed his innovation. Inquisitive, our lad begins to detect Rin's aroma. Irides claims he extracted information from a non-playable character and amalgamated it into a creature, crafting his finest creation to date. When summoned, the Dragon Knight rises. The main character is utterly astonished, whereas the entity appears to be chuckling. Observing the young girl confined in the rear, he declares that his greatest dread has just materialized and prepares to terminate that nightmare. In the midst of the confrontation, Kuro inquires why the youngster isn't retaliating. Our son claims it's due to the NPCs merged with the being. The Dragon Knight exhales cerulean fire, while simultaneously depleting the NPC's vitality. The protagonist evades yet another lethal strike, pondering if there exists any method to rescue those individuals, and if the solution could lie in those luminous armlets encircling the adversary's wrists. Chuckling, Irides asserts that he is aware the child will be incapable of triumphing. Deflecting another blow with his blade, Shadow chooses to evaluate his hypothesis. Subsequently, he vaults into the sky and materializes once more, in close proximity to the dragon, stating he's on the verge of demonstrating the true application of dual blades. Emerging behind the adversary, our lad strikes the bracelets, and a flash of illumination erupts. Astonished, the investigator inquires how that could possibly be, and instructs his creation to concentrate on its intended target. Complying, the dragon unleashes flames at the child, who merely observes the devastation unfold. Immediately following that, he employs his Shadow Path skill, and is positioned beneath the knight to complete the removal of the straps. He attacks once more, and the being commences shrieking, prior to succumbing to the earth, utterly vanquished. Anxious, Shadow ponders what transpired with the NPCs, and observes the data rings transforming into illumination. They persist in hovering, radiating, and the main character hopes they are all right. Abruptly, the illumination intensifies, and the captives collapse to the ground. Win awakens and notices Kento sprinting in her direction. She feels delighted when he embraces her, and he expresses his relief that she is well. Astonished, the researcher inquires about how the NPC information was recovered, and comes to the realization that his objective has not succeeded. On the ground, he expresses dissatisfaction that he was unable to attain an unparalleled course, and declares that he will never absolve Xiaobai for it. By merely pressing a button, the creatures ensnared within the conduits are discharged, and they prepare to execute their creator's vengeance. The primary. A man positions himself in front of the unsuspecting individuals and then shouts for everyone to leave. The researcher declares it will be enjoyable to observe him battle while attempting to safeguard the NPCs. A fiendish rodent leaps onto our lad and gnashes its teeth on his blade. Reflecting inwardly, he murmurs about the beings aren't particularly robust. Yet it transforms entirely when you have individuals to safeguard. Win finds herself seized by a creature and begins to shriek, compelling the main character to take swift action. Before long, the beings encircle the protagonists, as Irides urges them to simply complete it at once. Unexpectedly, an individual appears and inquires if Shadow requires assistance. It's a prodigy, and with minimal exertion, he eliminates the adversaries. The investigator, in a state of agitation, inquires about the presence of one of the 5 renowned NPCs. Our lad instructs his superior to escort Win and the others outdoors, and mentions he will arrive following his dealings with the researcher. The hired gun responds affirmatively, indicating that he will catch up with him later. Engaging his dual domain ability, Kento inquires of Irides whether he is prepared to lament all his actions. On the floor, the man pleads for mercy. However, the main character declares that the moment for the execution has arrived. Suddenly, another individual emerges and remarks that this will pose a challenge, because he won't permit the scientist to be slain. With a grin, Kento shows no signs of hesitation and launches directly into an assault, compelling Shadow to employ all his dexterity merely to raise his sword before his torso. Following the obstruction, the silver-haired individual remarks that this is going to be entertaining. Our young man expresses gratitude for the praise. As he contemplated the formidable nature of his adversary, the adversary claims he is aware that Shadow employs a rather perilous method, and upon observing the main character's response, he acknowledges that his assumption was correct. Presenting himself as one of the quartet of executives at Nordic Peak, Ken states it's a hit. Despite mitigating the effect, the main character discovers that the method strikes more forcefully with each subsequent impact. The adversary inquires about the number of assaults he believes he can endure. Anxious, our young lad attempts to withdraw, yet his limbs become immobilized by reptiles. With a single blow, he eliminates them. However, a greater number appear. Inidiz inquires about the duration Ken intends to prolong the conflict. Rather than seizing the opportunity to eliminate Shadow, the man approaches and remarks that would spoil the enjoyment, as the investigator shouts that he ought to express greater appreciation for the assistance. Kuro inquires whether it might be wise to make a quick escape while the two of them are in disagreement. Contradicting, the main character asserts that this is their opportunity to eliminate both simultaneously. Frustrated by the disruption, Ken asserts that there is no evading what lies ahead. Therefore, he is committing fully from this point forward. The cursed blade insists that its wielder must flee without delay, as the dual domain is accessible. And due to it being a definitive realm, no one is free from the regulations, not even him, implying that if the lad falters, he will be enveloped by the embrace of the divine. Without allowing him a moment to flee, the silver-haired man resumes delivering wolf-like strikes, asserting that he is truly resilient for enduring 10 consecutive assaults. Just when all appears futile, an individual unleashes a thunderous blow, compelling Ken to withdraw without delay. Ari arrives and declares that they are unable to halt the adversary. Not at this moment. When the main character inquires about her presence, she merely claims she will manage Irids, while believing she is merely present to assess if Shadow is deserving of wielding Kuro. Reverting to a more aggressive stance, the brawler remarks that the lady appears to have considerable faith in the youngster, and he will need to inquire of her the reason once he triumphs. The cursed blade continues to absorb the majority of the blows. Retreating, our young man comprehends that now that the individual has gained strength, he cannot bear to be struck. Rushing in, Ken declares there is no way out, subsequently delivers a blow utilizing the seamless stream fist choreography. The main character narrowly rescues himself once more, and his adversary asserts that it is. It has been an extended period since a confrontation stirred such emotions within him. Thus he deliberately overlooked, merely to demonstrate. The child ought to refrain from attempting to flee any longer, and ought to simply enjoy themselves. We observe our young man starting to perspire significantly. Back there, Ari ends up collapsing to the ground. The researcher states that this is the cost for them vandalizing his laboratory. Observing the colossal being, Kuro instructs Shadow to flee, ensuring that both he and the woman avoid being engulfed by the battleground. Reflecting on Rin, Kento declares that he shall never be defeated again. Thus, he declines to withdraw. Upon the earth, the lady expresses that she never imagined she would be the initial person to have faith in the young man. Kento claims the lad is unparalleled. Yet, all at once, the demon's limb engages, and a shroud envelops our lad and his blade. Shouting, the object indicates that the energy abruptly ignited within him. With a solitary swing, the limb eradicates the inventor's masterpiece, subsequently begins to converge on the remaining adversaries. Ken successfully deflects the initial strike. Simultaneously, the main character is contemplating why the hands of the divine appear to be genuinely taking form. Panicked, he hastily hurled spells at the ebony talons. However, his sorcery was neutralized, resulting in the incantation striking the silver-haired individual instead. Shadow declares that it is not finished just yet. The adversary pivots precisely at the right moment and successfully protects himself. Nevertheless, he sustains a laceration on his wrist that causes him to lose health points. Kuro expresses his affection for that sensation of authority, and that his proprietor should expedite their actions so he can assimilate all the information. On the surface, the investigator inquires why the blade is emanating such a malevolent energy, and how the child can maintain their composure while utilizing it. Ari arrives and remarks that this is merely a fraction of the weapon's capabilities. The limbs advance towards the researcher, becoming aware that there is no possibility of victory, especially since even Ken is having difficulty and resolved to escape unscathed. He seizes additional elixirs and hurls them onto the floor. It generates a vaporous haze, allowing them to flee. Ken declares that his time has expired, yet he would genuinely relish continuing the massacre. Our lad declares he won't allow him to escape. However, it's beyond the point of no return. The pair simply disappears. Isolated with Ari, Shadow inquires about her identity and the manner in which she elicited those powers within Kuro. She claims that if he truly desires to understand, he ought to proceed to Cafe Frozen the subsequent day at midday, provided he is genuinely intrigued. Prior to signing off, she discloses her awareness of Kento's name, which utterly astonishes him. Reflecting on all that has transpired, the main character contemplates what additional regulations Kuro may be aware of that he himself is not. Consequently, he determines that the sole alternative is to attend the gathering, regardless of his reluctance. Outside, Zaji declares that his role is complete, and all the non-player characters are secured in the safe location. Our lad expresses his gratitude while observing all the beings the man has defeated. We observe that as a prize he received the cloak of the assassin. Furthermore, the mercenary offers him the warrior's wrist guard. The main character is pleased with the presents. Subsequently, the pair bid farewell and vow to reunite at some point in the future. In the actual realm, Kagura visits Cafe Frozen and ponders how he is meant to discern which individual is present. Ari. All at once, someone utters his name. It's her, and in doing so, she demonstrates her familiarity with his appearance, despite the fact that he appears different from his portrayal in the game. Upon taking a seat, the main character presents herself as Ari, and expresses that it is a delight to encounter the monarch, or more accurately, the successor of the Jinguji clan. Startled, Kento inquires about how she is aware of that. She urges him to unwind and mentions that she examined the information she received from Kuro. In his mind, he's pondering how she could possibly possess a player's private information. However, he soon discovers that Ari is an engineer who contributed to the development of Yiji for the purpose of reversal. She was dismissed when the Jinguji faction assumed control. Now she seeks retribution. Yet, she will require assistance. Hearing that prompts him to recall all that Raito accomplished too. Kento inquires about what he stands to gain from aiding her and states that the sole motivation for his visit is his desire to learn more about Kuro. Conceding to his conditions, she states that she developed the armament to combat the Jinguji faction. The criteria for obtaining it are exceedingly stringent, as she sought to discover a participant who was genuinely deserving. Our lad ultimately pieces the puzzle together. Ari states that she needed to hand over Kuro to an exceptionally proficient player to ensure the consortium wouldn't become aware. After reflecting on it, Shadow expresses his conviction in her narrative, yet his sole objective is to triumph over King, not dismantle the entire Jinguji faction. He is on the verge of expressing that, but she interjects, acknowledging that it's challenging to confront the king without the appropriate equipment. Conceding her correctness, he acknowledges that he has previously been defeated by his sibling. Thus, the engineer inquires about his thoughts on acquiring a sponsor, as his broadcasts are skyrocketing. Kento mentions he has been contemplating it. However, as a novice, few individuals are inclined to support him. Arisa contends otherwise, and asserts that she belongs to the Oga faction, sufficiently formidable to challenge the Jinguji faction. It appears that the entity is regarded as one of the 5 largest conglomerates globally, and it is possessed by her father and elder sibling, which designates her as an inheritor. Arisa states that regardless, both of their objectives can be achieved if he consents to participate in the scheme. The main character responds that it's favorable, but indeed, however, discussing that in that location isn't particularly advisable. Suddenly, the woman erupts. Her fingertips and all those within the cafe come to a standstill. Prior to her providing an explanation, she asserts that the entire station is owned by the Oga group. Therefore, there is no cause for concern. She inquires once more whether Kento is inclined to assist her, as he merely gazes at her with his jaw agape. 4 weeks later, within the game, our protagonist is observing the Nordic Peak team. Kuro declares that they can finally commence the genuine retaliation. Concurring, The main character states that now that he is acquired superior equipment, he cannot permit any missteps, signaling that it's time to commence the pursuit. As darkness descends upon Gazev village, the outlaws are discussing the whispers, suggesting that the mastermind behind the sabotage is the guild leader, referred to as the younger sibling of the king. The divine forces appear poised to obliterate them. In an instant, a single blow decapitates two assassins effortlessly. Shadow materializes and remarks that they are exceedingly sluggish. Kuro asserts that the child is in excellent condition, however, but then he becomes aware that something is amiss, and that they had been the objectives from the beginning. Ken arrives and comments, as anticipated, the youngster possesses sharp instincts. Understanding the soldiers of fortune fixated on combat, the main character deduces that he will need to expend some energy. Prior to confronting King, everyone begins shouting, applauding for the silver-haired individual, yet suddenly, he outright strikes one of his own supporters and remarks, "Indeed, this is rather peculiar," just as he had anticipated. Subsequently, he discloses that despite being instructed to capture Shadow, what he genuinely desires is to confront him in a head-to-head battle. Subsequently, he inquires whether the child is genuinely the king's younger sibling. Our young lad inquires about the consequences of responding affirmatively. Ken expresses that he believed becoming part of a guild would be enjoyable, yet all he has been engaged in is pursuing NPCs without any genuine purpose. Thus, he is departing from Nordic Peak. The remaining outlaws claim that constitutes treachery. Nevertheless, Ken asserts that observing the lead character confront King will be far more captivating, so he will proceed ahead, and once everything concludes, they will conclude the battle they initiated previously. Kato concurs and expresses that if events unfold as he anticipates, he will be Ken's rival for the foreseeable future. Observing the child disappear, Ken is amazed by his swiftness and begins to chuckle. He then mentions that enjoyable activities consistently elevate his spirits, and despite his aversion to targeting a single individual, he adores that type of battle royale. Thus, the outcome is inconsequential, as the finest dessert will be awaiting him subsequently. Shadow journeys towards the settlement, where Rito is presently anticipating. Upon being inquired regarding Ken's treachery, our son claims it appears that his sibling subordinates don't particularly favor him. We discover that the village is deserted, as Kaguri took care to relocate all the non-playable characters. Indifferent to the situation, Rito expresses his weariness of anticipating the excitement to commence. Engaging his ability, the main character declares that this time he will triumph over him. Contemplating. To himself, King mentions he received notifications regarding that characteristic, yet the consequences remain uncertain. This signifies that he must eliminate all harm. Jinguji triggers his Royal Stronghold ability. Panicked, Kuro instructs Shadow to hold on. Clarifying it to the sword, the main character states that the enhancement increases the king's endurance for a duration of 3 minutes. Rushing forward, the knight asserts that his younger sibling won't even manage to graze him. Assessing the circumstances, Rito ponders the situation regarding the child's health points and questions why his strikes are ineffective. Our lad claims he understands his thoughts and the reasons behind them, sustaining harm, as damage is relevant solely when you successfully strike your adversary. The monarch is taken by surprise from the rear and proclaims he will cleave the earth to confine the child's actions with imperial annihilation. Shadow asserts that nonetheless, he will be the initial one to inflict pain upon him. Yelling, Jinguji commands him to dismount the horse, and demonstrating his complete strength, he declares that regardless of how fiercely he struggles, he will perpetually be a failure. Anxious, Kuro claims the child is taunting him excessively. However, Kento asserts that this is the strategy, since there is a method to circumvent the sacred imperial arrangement. Casting. During an assault, the monarch inquires whether the youth genuinely believes he will be deceived by the identical ruse on 2 occasions. The blade advises the main character to evade. The detonation is observable from several miles distant. Once the turmoil subsides, the warrior begins to chuckle, declaring that ultimately, he will forever be the victor. Emerging behind his rival, our lad wields his toxic blade and states that seemingly Irides did not reference his shadowy skill. The monarch retreats and inquires why his health points are diminishing. Clarifying the matter, the main character asserts that it's owing to his blade, which contains hydrotoxin. And upon activating his seismic ability, he proclaims that it's over, as anyone discovered within the quake will experience a reduction in their nimbleness by 50%, and, in addition to that, possessing his sanguine control characteristic, whenever the objective sustains harm, they forfeit 20% of their capabilities. Rado attempts to strike, yet his physique is immobilized, even with his sovereign configuration engaged. Our lad asserts that this is due to the fact that the sole aspect the formation is unable to shield against is direct strikes, which encompasses harm inflicted by debuffs. Bellowing, King inquires how on earth his ability is meant to be regarded as a stronghold. Shadow asserts that the arrangement does not render him impervious. What distinguishes an exceptional player is the ability to identify solutions to their shortcomings. As his sibling is essentially still a novice, he would like to greet him to YGG Traverse. The divine presence of God seems to emerge behind Rado. In the meantime, the main character resolves to launch an assault from above. The monarch asserts that it's not finished, as, indeed, he is unbeatable as long as the sacred imperial configuration remains active. Our lad claims he's neglecting something. His MP is nearly depleted. Prior to delivering the decisive strike, Kento bids farewell to King. Everyone. The enjoyable moments he experienced with that individual replaying in his thoughts. We witness the evening being cleaved in two prior to being engulfed by the grasp of the divine. Having completed the task, the main character announces that it is now Oga's turn. In the tangible realm, Rado is perplexed by how he could be defeated by someone so feeble. Subsequently, he opts to quench his thirst with a glass of water. Yet his phone begins to ring. Conversely, his father inquires what on earth he has just accomplished and instructs him to power on the television, where the entire deceitful plot is being unveiled in a news article. Enraged, the man inquires whether Jinguji intends to ruin the collective merely due to his excessive obstinacy. It appears that the individual responsible for divulging all the information was Arisa. She collaborated with the engineers who were unjustly dismissed to produce a video detailing the entire situation. And that's how they discovered Rado was the mastermind behind it, initiating the collapse of the Jinguji faction. Conversing with her, the main character inquires about what is about to occur with his sibling and the group. Ari states that the team will no longer be engaging with the Yujing expedition, and they have forfeited all their earnings. As for the architect, he appears to be receiving safeguarding. Therefore, she was unable to obtain substantial information. Our boy states that his father never truly showed concern for him, yet he holds affection for Rado. They then discuss how Arisa returned to her position at the gaming firm and received a promotion alongside her fellow engineers. With a grin, Kento expresses his eagerness for the upcoming updates. The alarm sounds, and he mentions that it's time. She advises him to exercise caution, and he reciprocates by urging her to do likewise. Subsequently, Shadow re-enters the game, where Ken was already anticipating. Getting ready, he says he has to keep his promise in front of the crowd watching, including Irides. Yelling, the man claims he is present solely because he was compelled to be. Ken urges him to relish the performance, and as he unleashes his ability, he declares that a monumental confrontation is on the verge of commencing. Our boy and Kuro grin, and subsequently they rush into the battle. The main character expresses the necessity of triumphing in that game, and the Blade expresses complete confidence that they will.